First of all, so sorry for the delay. Uh, Good evening, everyone. I hope all of you had a good day. If not, I think you are at the right place. I am Vaibhav, and on behalf of Indradhanu, the LGBTQIA collective of IIT Delhi, I welcome you all to today's talk. Since generations immemorable, we have inherited all that is wrong with our society. We were taught to love, but were given gendered template to imagine our love through. We were educated to value freedom, dignity, and equality, but for only a certain section of people. Today's talk focuses on one such topic: understanding queerness in homes, hostels, and other cohabitations. The tensions, the dilemmas, and the anxieties that a lot of us face while navigating our gender and sexuality in these private spaces is something that we wanted to discuss with all of you today. So, without much ado, I would like to introduce today's two moderators. We have our lovely coordinators of Indradhanu, Anand and Jeetu, who will be steering the conversation for all of you today. Ritik, sorry, Anand and Ritik. Um, Queer people are allowed to make mistakes. On that note, now coming down to the person of the hour, Miss Anjali Gopalan. Miss Anjali Gopalan doesn't need any introduction, but still I'll just give my 2 cents. Anjali Gopalan is a human rights and animal rights activist, founder and executive director of Naz Foundation India Trust, an NGO dedicated to fight against HIV/AIDS epidemic in India. She was actively involved in the pursuit of decriminalization of Section 377, and in fact, Naz Foundation was one of the first foundations to file a PIL against IPC 377 in India. Anjali is also a recipient of the Commonwealth Award for her unfailing dedication to fight for the marginalized communities such as the LGBTQIA community in India. She was also honored as a shortlisted candidate for Nobel Peace Prize. So, without much ado, I will leave the stage to both of our lovely moderators and Miss Anjali Gopalan. On that note, can we have a huge round of applause for three of them?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. First of all, we would like to pay our sincere regards to our chief guest for the day, Ms. Gopalan. Grateful to have you here, ma'am. Also, we would like to thank ODI's support for this event and Professor Anjali and Professor Simona for being here. Now, let's start. As we all sit here comfortably to touch down upon the nuances of queerness in private spaces, why is there a need to have such a conversation at first? I mean, we get it. We as a STEM institute may not be the most traditionally welcoming spaces for such conversations around gender, sex, and sexuality. But the issues are definitely real that we face. So most of us have gone through them in some way or the other. To have this very conversation, we have you, ma'am, today with us, along with your organization, the Naz Foundation. You have actively fought the battle to push for the abolishment of IPC Section 377 that criminalized homosexuality in India. So we are just curious to know at first, after your long battle against IPC Section 377, do you think the societal attitudes and issues have changed or even evolved in that way? How far do you think we have come since then?
I always kind of pause when I'm asked that question because I just wonder, have we actually made any movement forward? And then when I think about it, yes, we have. So you have a lot to be thankful for. The very fact that we're sitting here and discussing this issue would not have happened in the late 1990s. It just would not have happened. So I think change has happened. But having said that, I also know that it isn't happening at the rate that we want it to happen. If you think about it, we are where we are, and all that has happened in spite of years of this battle going on is that homosexuality has been decriminalized. All of us are very happy, of course. But for God's sakes, you still have a huge section of society, in spite of what the courts say. The courts actually, Supreme Court judge actually said they're a minuscule minority, how does it matter? But the point is, today, the LGBTQI, it's a bit different for the trans community, but the rest still do not have rights that all citizens take for granted in this country. Which is why we need to have these conversations. Which is why we need to figure what is it that we have to do to change the environment. Because if we don't do that, we're going to continue for the next God knows how many years in the manner that we are. So we can't sit back and be comfortable about the fact that it has been decriminalized. Also, it's important to talk about these issues because we constantly get calls where people say, "Can we now? Where can I go and get married?" Like, you can't. And that's the reality. Oh, but what about 377? Yes, 377 has only no longer can the community members be seen as criminals. That's all. What the other thing that's happened is that at least in the privacy of your homes or wherever you can be private, you can have sex with your partner without being arrested. So no longer are you criminals. But if you're looking for rights, like the right to marry, right to inherit, right to adopt, anything of that sort, right to have access to insurance that your partner has, all of that, none of that is allowed. So we have a long battle ahead of us.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Majority of the audience here, I believe, is around 20 to 25 years of age. So up until this point of time, we all have spent most of our times at our homes, right? So we try to, learn to navigate through those spaces. One personal incident I would like to quote that in my childhood, my parents used to dress me and my brother up in a sari for a fun photo shoot. And I believe this practice is quite prevalent in Indian society, Indian families. So I would like to know from you, how does this mentality change as we grow up, and how as an individual one can create a safe environment, one can find a safe environment along with this mentality of the parents or of the society as we grow up.
You know, this parents issue is a big issue and a very difficult one to talk about. So just to share what's been happening in our lives. So for many years now, I have been counseling families, right? Usually it's men who are brought in with the parents. And I'll tell you 9.5 times out of 10, this is how the conversation goes. 3 hours of head banging, and then they'll say, ठीक है मैडम, हम इनकी बात मान लेते हैं, हम आपकी बात मान लेते हैं, हम एक्सेप्ट कर लेते हैं कि ये ऐसा है. They won't say the word, even समलैंगिक, which is a very polite word, right? Can't get it out. हम एक्सेप्ट कर लेते हैं, पर इसको बोलो शादी कर लो. So then I'm going, पर शादी ये करना नहीं चाहता. अरे मैडम, इसमें कौन सी बड़ी बात है? There is no problem. Tell him to get married. All he has to do is have a few children. And what he does in his own time, no one is going to question. हम नहीं पूछने वाले कहाँ जाता है, कब घर आता है. Kind of dovetails into how we look at women, women's sexuality, marriage. And then, again, 10 out of 10 times, I never see these boys again. I never see these young men again because the parents forbid them to come back to Naz. Q, because I have not told them to become straight and to get married and have kids. Even conversion therapy, yes, it still exists. It is still happening in spite of what the courts have said, in spite of what doctors have said, in spite of what the medical council have said. We still have conversion therapy happening. And who is taking young men and women for conversion therapy? Parents. So unless society changes its attitudes, we're going to continue having a problem. And unfortunately, I'm not blaming the parents. I'm not saying that. All of us are a product of our environment, and our parents are also a product of that environment. So for them, the concern is, how will society react? How will I deal with the world? How will I deal with my relatives who are going to say, "Beta, shaadi kyun nahi kar raha?" Right? Women ke liye to there's absolutely no space. There, at least to my mind, there is an acceptance of male homosexuality long as you don't make it an issue of rights. There is that acceptance. But for women, zilch. Because women's sexuality is not something that is spoken about at all. And secondly, nothing challenges patriarchy more, of course, than homosexuality, but especially lesbianism. Because as a woman, what are you saying? As a woman, I want to spend the rest of my life with another woman. I don't need a man. Doesn't go down well. So, actually, if you look at just homosexuality itself, it's challenging patriarchy every step of the way. Which is why, and the courts have also said this, that we need to work with society to change attitudes. Now, working with society is what? Is that we get, for example, teachers, counselors, doctors, medical health professionals. These issues have to be part of their curriculum. That's when attitudes will start changing. Counselors still will tell young people, go to them, "Theek ho jaoge, ye to passing phase hai." A very common thing that is said, right? So we have a lot of work to do. And I think to change attitudes is going to take time, but it happens. Which is why one cannot give up hope. And that it takes time. Please understand this, it really takes time. And one example I always quote, and I think all of us must read about this, sati. If you read, when sati was highly prevalent in northern India, if you read about those times, you can never imagine that sati would have stopped. But in today's day and age, we don't see women jumping onto the funeral pyre of their husbands. We don't see it. But if you read about that time, you'll think that that was an impossibility. So laws changed, attitudes changed, times have changed, behaviors have changed. So I still have a lot of hope, but it's never at the pace that we want to see it happen.
Definitely, ma'am. So, coming back to our next section, so I think we all can agree that the transition from our homes to colleges and to our institutions is usually quite difficult to do, right? And being queer actually adds to the problem because you are coming to an unfamiliar environment where you're meeting a lot of new people and they might not be welcoming at times. I mean, in my experience, most of the times they were not. And there wasn't any space, a safe space or a warm space to talk about my issues or talk about my sexuality, even to express it openly, right? So what would be your best advice for kids who are coming from their homes to institutions for their higher education or to start the next chapter of their life? What are your advices to them? I mean, how to open up in these institutions?
I think you have to be careful. I think you have to prepare people before you open up. A very recent example, I don't know if you'll remember, a year ago this was actually, in Faridabad, there was this kid in class 11 or 12, 16-year-old, who committed suicide, right? And it's interesting, the mother had accepted her son's sexuality. It's not like the mother was saying, "There's something wrong with you, I don't." However, in his suicide note, he writes that he had been sexually abused by his classmates. They were giving him a really hard time. And when he went to his teachers and the principal of the school, they did not in any way respond to his angst. And it's huge for a 16-year-old to be sexually abused in school. He said he couldn't go into toilets because going into toilet meant sexual abuse. And he wasn't being abused by adults, he was being abused by his peers. So I think when you move into this space where there are these changes, where you yourself are grappling with your sexuality in a different manner, where you're trying to find the language and the ability to express your sexuality, the way you do it and share it with those around you becomes very important. People need to be prepared. You cannot take a risk and just tell anyone and everyone. So you have to suss out for yourself who you can speak with. And luckily, I think, when I talk about times having changed, today most colleges and universities do have a queer group on campus. So please reach out to them. And I would actually tell queer groups that when admissions happen, please be visible. Put yourself out there so that people can reach out to you if they need to. Because that's where they're going to get a lot of support.
Right, ma'am. And I just have a follow-up question to that. So a lot of us who are hostlers, we do have some kind of a peer support in our hostels. Sometimes they are allies and sometimes they are part of the community. But at the same time, a lot of us are alone in our respective hostels, and they do not enjoy that peer support which a lot of us may have, right? And at times, being in hostel involves a lot of name calling, a lot of moral policing about someone's fashion, about their appearance, about what they say or do or how they express their sexuality. And from my personal experience, as a self-identifying man, it is difficult to open up in those situations, and it is difficult to report because I have this fear of being ridiculed. And I know a lot of my male friends also have this idea, where they won't open up because it will be ridiculed. And among boys, there's this quote that "chalta hai, mazak mein kar diya," but it really hurts, a lot, and it can really affect someone's mental health. So how do you, what is your best advice for them? I mean, how to open up as a guy, as a man there?
Listen, I go back to saying this, that please prepare people before you open up. First of all, there's no tearing hurry to open up. And you only open up when you know that you are in a space which is safe. Because we've seen tremendous levels of violence against people when they have come out. So be very careful how and when you come out. And a lot of that has to do with groups like yours, working with the authorities to create an environment where they know that this kind of violence will not be tolerated. That has to go out very clearly. That this is something, first of all, if someone is in any kind of situation where they feel unsafe, there has to be a space within college campuses for them to be able to report it. So unless you work on this on a continuing basis, it's going to be difficult. But I still go back to saying that, look, you have these groups, please be out there, be visible as much as is possible in a safe manner. Not that, but you need to let people know you're available to them, for them to reach out to you. Because otherwise it's going to be really tough. But laws are changing, and I think using the laws to your advantage is also another thing that you need to start looking at.
Ma'am, I would like to touch down upon the incidents of that kid RB, which you were just mentioning. The kid RB used to got molested, got sexually harassed in the restroom. So recently also our LGBTQIA collective Indradhanu, we rolled out the gender inclusive restrooms on our campus. So homes and hostels are quite contrasting in this nature, because at homes all the family members share the same washroom, but at hostels and in public institutions such is not the case. So what do you think, why does this same concept become segregated in public spaces, and how should we as an individual can navigate through that space?
So when you're talking about your university and your colleges and all of this, are there toilets which are gender neutral?
No, currently they are not. We just recently in January we rolled out the gender inclusive restrooms, some basic facilities.
So that's one way of dealing with it.
Right.
But again, when we're looking at toilets, suppose you have a toilet which says male, female, whatever you call the third one. Some call it other, some call it trans, some call it gender neutral, whatever you want
All
to call
gender
it.
is fine.
Yes. But the point is that it's really difficult for someone to go to that toilet when they're being observed that they're going into that toilet if they're not open about their sexuality. Right? So do we make all toilets gender inclusive? In the ideal world, yes. But I know many women who will say, we want toilets for women separate from men. We don't want to access gender inclusive toilets. So this is an ongoing battle. So recently I had just finished training the Rajasthan police post the Nalsa judgment. We've done a training of the entire Rajasthan police. So one of the issues that came up was two things. The big concern the cops had. One was, ये लोग जो इतने चोर उचक्के हैं, they were talking about the trans community. ये जो चोर उचक्के हैं, कल हमारे बॉस भी हो सकते हैं क्या? Big fear. And then, अब आप कहोगे कि इनके लिए भी टॉयलेट होना चाहिए? So I said, हाँ. So then the women in the training, in one of this training sessions said, but यहाँ तो औरतों के लिए टॉयलेट्स हैं नहीं. Then another guy said, he said, हमारे थाने में तो कोई टॉयलेट्स ही नहीं है. So we said, हाँ, big problem. But the point is that we have to veer increasingly towards gender inclusive toilets. Otherwise, it's going to be another continuing problem. Right? And in public spaces, yes, it is going to be different from homes. Because that's the reality. Of course, in a home, we never say, but let me tell you, that's how the laws are. For example, we run a home for children, right, who are orphans. Usually the government under the JJ Act does not allow you to run a home where both boys and girls are there. So I had to actually fight with the authorities, say you better give us our license based on that we can take care of both because our children are HIV positive. Where are they going to go? Then we had the authorities come and say, Acha, you put a wall between. So we said, okay, we'll keep the girls and boys on separate floors. Then they said, you put a wall in between so that those below 12 are on one side and those above. Finally, I gave up. I said, listen, I can't do any of this. Please take the kids and go. Then they backed off. And in our homes, we would never think of separate toilets for everyone. But the moment it becomes institutionalized, there are laws that you have to follow. There are rules that you have to follow, and one of them is that toilets have to be separate.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So moving forward, post decriminalization within 1 or 2 years, the pandemic happened. So, a lot of queer folks had to get back to, or I must say, were forced to get back to their homes. And homes at times might be unwelcoming,
Very violent.
Might be abusive at times also. And, the family dynamics play a very important role in our lives, especially in the lives of queer folks. So, how can one try to, navigate through the space in such uncertain times, whenever it might come, like one that of a pandemic?
Yes, it's a very difficult time, and there were many such cases. What the pandemic did was forced people back into situations of violence. There are a couple of things I've always shared with people. One is this tremendous hurry that all of us have to come out. Please, do not just decide to come out and come out like that. Parents have to be prepared. Families have to be prepared. And how are you going to do it? You have to create an environment. You get them whatever way you follow for yourself. But to me, what is most important is that you must be financially independent before you come out. The biggest problem we are seeing is that young people are coming out, and then there's this whole thing, tum ghar chhod ke chale jao. We will not fund your education anymore. These are the things that happen. So before you come out, there are some things you need to remember. I'm not saying don't come out, but there's a time and place for everything. Secondly, parents need to be prepared. How do you prepare? We get them to meet people like us, get them to see films, sit with them, discuss. There are so many things you'll have to do before you start coming out. Our biggest problem here is the violence that young people face from their families. And COVID made it so clear. So it's very important that you follow a process where you're not exposing yourself unnecessarily.
Definitely, ma'am. Now, I would like to talk about something else. So, as queer individuals, in fact, a lot of us do have this sense of loneliness when it comes to, just speaking from a personal experience, I do know a lot of elderly queer folks who are my friends, who are, who have this sense of loneliness in their late 20s and early 30s, and some are even single throughout their 40s. And it's quite apparent throughout the community, it's quite, present. So how does one deal with such an environment, especially when today we have this same-sex marriage, petition going on, but still right now it doesn't look very promising. Of course, we have made progress, but it doesn't look very promising right now, given the advances. So how do we navigate through this uncertain time, and what has your experience been, and what would you like to advise?
Listen, I think many of us are caught up in traditional ways of defining relationships. And unfortunately, all of it is in a very heterosexual framework, including marriage. But I think all of us need to understand, and I think all of us do that. We create our own family systems. And loneliness is something that, yes, it's a part of many people's lives. Therefore, can you do something about creating an environment where, I can tell you as a single person, of course, many people are, tumhara kya hoga kind of situation. I said, please, I need a break from people. It is what you create for yourself, right? And all of us have to learn to create that environment. And at the end of the day, it's about our relationships with whoever it is, including relationships which are not sexual. And all of us create alternate families, don't we? And that's what we need to do. So loneliness very often is something that it's here. How do you learn to deal with it, and how do you create an environment to fight it? And I know from my own experience, I don't get up. There are times when I just want not to meet anybody. But that's me. I decided that's what my life is going to be like. So if I sneeze today, I have 50 people saying, "Arey, tum theek to ho." So it's all about us, how we look at life, how we build relationships, and how we are going to make sure that we cement those relationships. And that doesn't have to be only about family and wife and husband.
So, ma'am, one thing that comes to my mind when we talk about these cohabitations now, let's come to that, is that they're also prone to incidences of abuse by, let's say, other members from the same community as well, right? There have been incidences. So, and violence as well, right? So, and this might be magnified at the intersection of queerness and caste and socioeconomic status, religion. So, would you like to share your experience on that, and how does one manage their situation in such cohabitations?
Well, of course it happens. It's no different from the rest of the world because you're not living in isolation. right? So violence is something that, how do we learn to deal with it, is up to us. Why are we in that situation of violence is something we need to understand. Can we reach out to individuals who can help us steer through this? And do we want to take a stand? Now, I know in queer relationships, it's no different than it is in straight relationships. We have been in situations where people have come to us, we've gone to the cops, we've been able to file an FIR, and then one of those people have withdrawn the FIR. This is when it is so difficult to file an FIR in a same-sex relationship. But we managed to do it, not once, on a number of occasions. And they withdraw. It is no different than it is between men and women. And yes, intersections of, say, caste, class, it's not uncommon for us to see people from different class situations having sex with each other, but in a public space not even acknowledging each other. We have seen tremendous levels of violence. I just feel it is no different. We all are a reflection of our own, of what we are surrounded by. It's not going to be different because we are queer. It's not more violent or less violent. It's how do you learn to deal with that violence and get out of that situation is what becomes important. And really figure out why you are in that situation to begin with.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing your experiences and advising these young folks. And I'd like to first thank the audience for patiently listening to this conversation. Before we could take up questions from you, just to enlighten the mood, I'd like to ask a question from you. Fashion is something, fashion is one of the many ways through people express themselves. And especially as a queer person, for me, it indeed is. So I'd love to know from you, like, who has been your fashion inspiration?
Hello, you're talking to the one woman who is so not interested in clothes or fashion. Listen, I look what I wear. And
Looking gorgeous.
It looks
Thank
nice.
you very much. But fashion is not my passion. But I of course love what you're wearing. For example, I can appreciate it. But for me, I think I wear clothes only because I have to. It's that bad. It's really that bad. But yeah. So what was your question?
Like, who has been your fashion inspiration,
Who has
if any?
been my fashion inspiration? Are you? Clearly, if you look at me, you know I don't have one. But I think what I really love is seeing the way young people dress today, because I don't think I would ever have the guts to do something like that. And I really find that it takes such a level of being comfortable with yourself to be able to wear what many young people are wearing today. So all of you are my inspiration when it comes to fashion.
Thank you very much.
So before we move on to the audience, I just have one more question to ask you. I'm sorry, it won't take much time. So, from your experience, dealing with such issues in the last 3 decades, more than that, would you like to share one story or experience with us where the family of the person, where you were able to make that positive transformation and you were like personally really, really satisfied and happy to see that story of transformation?
Yes. There are quite a few of those. There was this young couple actually who finally we were able to resolve the issue. The family accepted, and I think for me the really good part was that they actually did a small religious ceremony in the home, and this was in 1996. So I'm talking years ago, even before 377 had been decriminalized and all of that we actually had that religious ceremony, and we had it at Naz. So that was the first thing that happened, and that's what actually gave me a lot of hope, because I felt, okay, these were very very simple people, uh, very working class people. So to see that, to me, was such joy. And really, I think that made me feel so strongly that so much is possible. Yeah, that was really a...
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing that experience. Now the floor is open to your audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Hello. Okay, that's cool. Hello, ma'am. So I love what you were talking about, and one of the first things that came into mind during the initial part of what you were saying is that we actually need to prepare other people before coming out into the society. So could you please elaborate on how to actually prepare the environment of being in college as well? What actually goes into that?
I think you have to work at different levels. One is the authorities themselves. And the good part today is there is a change in the environment overall. One is the authorities. The other is how do you do sessions like these, but not limited to queer folks and allies. We need to speak to beyond the converted. It takes time, understand that, and do not put yourself in a situation of where you're unsafe. When I talk about preparing people, please figure out from your conversations with people on these issues what their responses are. Just as what we do today when we talk politics. At least for my age of people today, before I open my mouth about, as much as is possible, before I open my mouth about politics, I actually try to figure out, can I talk about what I really feel and think? So, you have to really understand that you have to be careful who you speak with. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because we do see very high levels of violence against people who come out sometimes. But also, on the flip side, we see a lot of acceptance. In your own lives, you will see sometimes you have told certain friends, and they've said, but we always knew, what's the big deal? Right? Then there are others who say that their friends never speak to them again. So please be careful how and who, and figure out for yourself. I also think it becomes very important for us to continuously, one of the things is I do advocate it even with schools, especially from class 9 to 12, to authorities to let us talk about these issues, which by the way, they're not open to at all. But I feel that's the time when we really need to be talking about these issues. Maybe even younger if possible. But 9th standard onwards, they're still okay about it. Younger than that, they don't want us to talk about these issues. Colleges, yes, absolutely. You remember a few years ago, the Delhi University had said that they would have, post the Nalsa judgment, that they would have a reservation for trans students. And they called me to come and do some session with those who would be involved in the process of when they're going to do admissions. So their biggest concern was, how will we deal with these students when they come? Very basic, right? So those are the fears that we have to deal with and talk to people about without judging them. Because that's when attitudes change. Otherwise, you're not going to get attitudes to change, right? For them to even understand, most trans kids drop out of school. Even the courts, look how they're thinking. You're not securing them at the school level, but you want reservation at the college level. They don't even make it to college. However, if we don't continue engaging people and making them understand. Because even in this room, let me ask you a question. Do you think homosexuality is normal? Yes. I'm assuming everyone nodding, no? Yes. Why? Why do you think it is normal and natural?
A certain percentage of people in the population might be genetically predisposed to be homosexual.
Okay. So you are saying that there's a genetic reason for predisposition to being gay. So therefore it is?
It may be.
It may be.
But
Okay.
I'm not sure about the percentage, but it is definitely there.
Okay. Anyone else?
It has been observed in the animal kingdom.
Anyone else?
Because it came naturally to me, so it's natural to me. I didn't chase it.
All right. Hold on. So, one of the easiest things when people tell me, especially in counseling and all, na, कि अच्छा आप कह रहे हैं ये normal natural है, कैसे कह सकते हैं? So I make them do this exercise which I'm going to make you do. So anyone asks you next time about this, no, make them do this exercise. Close your eyes for a few seconds and remember the first time you were attracted to someone. How old were you? And who was that individual? Okay, open your eyes. Shouldn't take more than a few seconds. Okay, now, my question is, I'm not asking you who you were attracted to. I don't want to know that. What I want to know is how old were you? First time when you felt this sense of attraction to someone?
14.
14, 16, 12, 7, 11, 5, yes? Yes. Some are early bloomers. All right. But the average age is 7 to 11. Now, when you first felt this, you saw someone and did you stop and think, oh, for those who are straight in this room, did you stop and think that, oh, I'm feeling this, but I should be attracted to the opposite sex? Or did it just happen? Just happen. Just like that, as it is for straight people, to know that they are intuitively attracted to the opposite sex, just like that, for people who are not straight, it's the same. So for someone who is not straight, it is really normal and natural for them to be feeling the way they do. Just as straight people feel that it's really natural to be attracted to the opposite sex, in the same way it's really natural to be attracted to the same sex if you are gay. It's as simple as that. Just as someone said, because for me it was really natural to feel like that. But somehow the whole world thinks that only heterosexual attractions are natural. So this is a very simple way of making people understand that, look, it's not a matter of choice. You don't decide. Listen, the most common thing today, people will tell me, आजकल का तो ये फैशन हो गया जी. ये फैशन हो गया है कि everyone is homosexuality fashionable हो गया है. So somehow you have to take those, and these are fears people have. Actually, it comes from a space of fear. Because as in some discussion I was having with some BJP politician on some TV channel some years ago, they said, आप ऐसे बोलेंगे तो सब लोग gay ही हो जाएंगे. So I said, फिर शायद ये अच्छी बात होगी ना. शायद हम लोग सब gay हैं normally, naturally. Heterosexual लोग कम ही होंगे. So, I mean, it came from such a deep sense of fear that our species will end. So I said, that's the last thing we need to worry about right now. But this is the fear that people have. So unless we address those fears, we are not going to be able to move forward. So don't take it to heart, but invest in changing attitudes. And very often it is one at a time.
Is it possible to ask another question?
Yes?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so, ma'am, my another question was that you talked about preparing themselves, but the one thing that people most need is acknowledgement from their parents. So when I tried explaining to them about homosexuality, there were two arguments. The first one was that it's a westernized concept. The second argument was that कि पहले ऐसा होता था या नहीं था. Because when we talk about all of this, people don't actually bring up the historical evidence of why homosexuality existed in the previous eras or not, or it just came out in the 21st century. So could you please talk about that?
So, listen, obviously in the Hindu texts, we have references to homosexuality in the Mahabharata, in the Puranas, there are many instances, at least in Hinduism. Clearly there are many instances. You have the concept, if you have Ayyappa in the south, who was married, who was born out of union between Vishnu and Shiva, though Vishnu takes the form of Mohini. You have Ardhanareshwar. What is that? Half man, half woman. That all of us, and the idea is that we have both within us, right? So references to homosexuality have been there. Reference to the trans community have been there. Arjun lives as a woman for a year. When Ram and Sita leave, who stays back at the gates of Ayodhya and doesn't, before going, Ram says, all of you guys go back. All citizens, men and women of Ayodhya, go back, don't wait for me here. He goes off and he turns around and walks off. When he comes back, he finds that there is a group of people still waiting for him. They never left the gates of Ayodhya, because they said, we are neither man nor woman. So there are references right throughout. In Sufi music, in Sufi traditions, even the relationship with the Creator, all of it is reflected in all of, it's not like it doesn't exist. What decriminalizing did was one thing. It was really common for people to say, this is a Western phenomenon, it does not exist in India. The moment Section 377 was decriminalized, the 2009 judgment, what did it do? At that time, many people came out. There was a lot more visibility, a lot of young people came out. But more than that, no longer could we sweep it under the carpet that this does not exist in this country. Finally, the courts have said, you decriminalize, obviously it exists, that's why you're saying it, you have to decriminalize. So how, it is something that is within our culture. So you cannot deny it anymore. So now I'm hearing less and less of it being a Western phenomenon. The other thing you said about parents not accepting, yes, that is, I'm telling you, it's not only acceptance, it is parents who take you for conversion therapy. Someone from outside is not coming to take you for conversion therapy. It is parents who throw violence on you. That's where violence starts right from the beginning. So unfortunately, the home becomes a very unsafe space for a child who is not following the norm. It could be anything. So it is an issue. And therefore, when the court said, we need to talk, we need to change attitudes in larger communities, what do they mean? They mean that society has to learn to accept. And that can't happen till you have it at many levels. One is at the family level, but the other thing many of us are advocating for and really pushing government, saying, look, these issues need to be included in your teaching curriculum. They need to be included in curriculums where you train the police, healthcare professionals, IAS officers. Everyone needs to understand and learn. That's when change will happen. And the home is a part of that. But that's the to me, that's the most frightening space actually in all of this, is the violence that exists in homes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's been very enlightening and very interesting talk. I wanted to ask whether have you come across any case where the person is both queer and disabled? So what happens when disability and queerness intersect, since both cases are understood in terms of this idea of the norm, the normality, both are deviating bodies. And then it's also understood that they're lacking something essential. And on the other hand, they are also attached with something superabundance of stereotypical perceptions and all. So how do you relate these two instances, disability and queerness?
Very hard, very difficult, because actually with disability, queer or not, sexuality is a problematic area for people with disabilities. The biggest issue people face who are working with, and I'm talking about families who have disabled children, for example. And of course, we've had cases where queer disabled people have come to us for counseling. The biggest problem is, how do we train parents to talk about issues of sexuality with disabled children? And here I'm talking about fairly severe disabilities. So for them to even understand that, how does one teach a disabled person to masturbate? And that it is okay to do that. It is something that it's a need for them. These are really difficult issues. Then for disabled people to even talk about queerness becomes very difficult. I have counseled families where this issue has been prevalent, and it's taken us a long time to get the parents to even understand how to start giving these children the space, these young people, the space to express any of their sexuality. It's very difficult. And especially for disabled people, though, there's absolutely no space, zero space. So we've not been very successful in being able to resolve many of the issues that come up in this arena of disability and sexuality. I think that's one of the gaps.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question. I'm right here. Okay. Yeah. So, given the Supreme Court is going to start hearing the petitions on legalization of same-sex marriage, do you think anything substantial is going to come out of it? Is the Supreme Court going to legalize it or not? Just wanted to ask that.
Listen, I don't think the Supreme Court can legalize it. But what it can say is maybe push the government to look at this issue, because ultimately it is in the hands of the government. And we would want Parliament, for example, to make that happen, because then it can never be overturned. Look at Roe versus Wade. What's happened in America with the abortion rights, 50 years after it was what's happened today. So for me, the hopeful part is that the fact that the Supreme Court is willing to listen to these arguments is a big step forward. Can they do anything more than just listen and bring about certain changes? We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. But it's a great thing that they did not completely throw it out, and they have said that they're willing to listen to these arguments. So let's see what happens. But the way I look at it and what gives me, I cannot imagine on what grounds are we going to continue denying people who are citizens of this country rights that every citizen must have access to. So I think it's a matter of time that this has to happen. Because for example, I think the problem is here, is if you talk about the right to marry, then there are many other rights which accrue which also have to be looked at. You can't look at it in isolation. You also have to look at divorce. You also have to look at many insurance. You have to look at many other things, adoption, inheritance, all of that you have to look at. So I don't know what the courts are going to do. But the only hope I have is that the very fact that they are willing to hear, I feel a sense of hope. Let's wait and see.